Hi, hello, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny. I'm a Canadian knitter and spinner, but I've lived in the UK for about the last 8 years or so and moved in the last couple of years up to the absolutely beautiful northeast of England. So that is where I am coming to you from today. I have one finished object that I am so excited about, and lots of partially started objects. I'm trying to be a less monogamous knitter and it's not really working, so I'll talk about that a little bit. And then right at the end, I just wanted to share really quickly a few more details about the bighorn sheep sweater that I designed and knitted and shared a video about a couple of weeks ago now, just because I did use Ladderback jacquard for the first time in that sweater, so I wanted to talk about that a little bit quickly. So that's where we're headed. Thank you so much for joining me, and here we go. Okay, so jumping right in, I am not going to show you the Stormer sweater that I am knitting out of Icelandic unspun yarn for my mom that I'm knitting out of Florilopi. That was the main project that I featured in the last regular episode that I uploaded, which I think was several weeks ago now, and I essentially have made no progress on that at all since I made that video. And I've made no progress at all on it, kind of deliberately, kind of not deliberately. And I think I mentioned in that previous video that I was finding the Florilopi hard on my hands, and I was hoping to intersperse some other projects just to kind of vary the types of tension I was using, vary the types of needles that I was using. In general, I've always been quite a monogamous knitter, and I find it quite anxiety-inducing to have more than one thing on my needles. But I've been trying to loosen up a bit, both literally and figuratively, and try to have more projects going at once so that if I start to be sore, in addition to taking breaks, I can also switch to a different project and maybe, you know, exercise my hands in a different way. I'm not sure that that's working for me. I'm not sure that I can make the transition from monogamous knitter to less monogamous knitter quite so easily. Maybe I will never be able to be a fully non-monogamous knitter, because basically as soon as I put the Stormer away and turned to other things, I had no interest in going back to the Stormer. And I know that that is just an illusion. I know that as soon as I pick it up and start knitting on it again, I will love it the way that I was loving it when I was working on it. And I was not excited about the idea of putting it away and working on other things. I become a bit obsessive. I like to work on what I'm working on. But once it was out of sight, it was definitely out of mind. So I have made no progress on that at all. That's not a terrible thing. As I've mentioned before, you know, I'm hoping to give this sweater to Mum in August when I go out to Canada for a friend's wedding. So I've got lots and lots of time, but at the same time, the Florilopi is very warm. It's incredibly insulating. And if we do get warm weather here, it hasn't really happened yet, but if it does get much warmer, then it might not be a totally comfortable wool to knit with. So there both is no pressure and just a little bit of pressure. I'd like to get it done before it becomes uncomfortable to work on it. So not all of that to say, a little bit of a babble to say, I'm not going to show you that project today because I've made absolutely no progress on it since I last showed it to you, but I am planning on picking it up again and you know, refinding the joy of that project and getting it done before it gets too warm. But putting that aside, it did let me focus on other projects, and I have had a lot of fun. Also, lots of silly mistakes, some frustrations. I haven't done a ton of knitting, I should say. I haven't done a ton of knitting since I posted the last regular video of this. Part of that is because I've been doing a bit more spinning, which I will share at some point. I find it a bit harder to share the spinning when it's not attached to a project, so I might continue, as I did with the Zwartbles last time, showing the spinning kind of once I know what I'm going to do with it. Or maybe I'll find ways to talk with the spinning that is more grounded. I haven't quite figured that out yet for myself. But I've been doing a bit more spinning. I also had quite a bit of a health dip. Partially that might be the weather changing, partially I'm on a new medication and that often kind of wipes me out. So I haven't been doing as much knitting just because I haven't been up to doing very much of anything. So a little bit less to show you than usual, but you know, fast is not the goal, so that's okay. And definitely trying to give myself grace to only do knitting when it's gonna give me joy. Only knit when it's gonna give me joy. So a little bit less knitting in general to show you, but I do have a finished object and I'm so excited about it. And it's small, but oh, it's so exciting. So the one and only finished object I have to share today is a scarf made out of my hand-spun Zwartbles. This is the yarn that I showed in the previous video, and oh, I'm so excited about it. It's so sheepy. It's so sheepy. I haven't blocked it yet. And I haven't even talked to you about what pattern this is yet. I will talk about that. But I haven't blocked this yet, partially because it's so small and I have quite a bit of spinning that's almost ready to wet set. And if it's all undyed, I figure it can all go in the same, you know, bath anyways. So I'm kind of waiting until I've plied up a few more things, and then I'm just gonna block a lot of things together, just to save effort and energy and wool wash. So I haven't blocked this yet, but it has been cool enough here that I have been wearing it even though it isn't blocked, and it is so warm and so sheepy. My partner, my husband, is laughing every time I wear this. He jokes that he doesn't want to hug me because I smell so much like a sheep, which I think is a good thing, and you know, if he doesn't, that's on him. He's joking. He finds it funny. So, as you can probably see, I mean, it's quite dark, so maybe it's not easy to see, but this is not the Pumila scarf, which is what I was planning on knitting with this project. So I talked previously about the Pumila scarf by Ayano Tanaka, and I have bought that pattern. I'm so excited about that pattern. I have lots of other yarns that I could use for that pattern, so I will do it at some point. But there were a few reasons that I decided not to do that with this yarn in the end. One of those is that I had not wet set the yarn when I showed it to you last time, and I think it was sitting at right around 200 meters, maybe just under 200 meters before I wet set it. And it changed so much when I wet set it. It plumped up so much, and that might be, it was a surprise, and it might be a surprise partially because my first spin was a very different fiber. It was Shetland. But I think I had also really underplied the Shetland. I think when I last talked about the Shetland, I felt like I had underspun it. I don't think that's true. I think I had spun it fine. I think I had underplied it. So I wonder if that's part of why it didn't plump up in quite the same way. I don't know if anybody's, you know, I'm such a baby spinner. I'm so happy to be corrected. If you know better than me, please don't hesitate. But anyways, I was much happier with this plying job, and the fiber fluffed up so beautifully, and I lost a fair bit of meterage. I was hovering just around the 180 meter mark, which is what the Pumila scarf calls for. And so it probably would have been fine. You know, most knitwear designers build in kind of 10 to 15% of wiggle room in the meterage that they provide, just to make sure people don't end up playing yarn chicken, and so that you can swatch and all of those good things. So it probably would have been fine. But since this is the first time that I'm ever knitting with my hand spun, and that makes it feel really precious, and just generally I don't like playing yarn chicken, I figured I would be more conservative. I would be a bit safer and not take on a project that might end up a bit tight in terms of yardage or meterage. But the other reason that I opted not to do that scarf is because the texture of the yarn had changed so much, and it had plumped up so much that it just didn't feel to me the way the Pumila scarf looks, or the way that I want it to look. It just no longer, the yarn no longer really fit with what I was picturing for that scarf. And it just didn't, you know, didn't excite me in that pattern anymore. So, no big deal. Put that pattern aside. I will do that another time. And I mean, there's such a plethora. I'm quite pleased that tiny scarves are really popular right now. I think I've mentioned that I have one tiny scarf that I knit years and years ago out of a sock yarn. But I wear it so much because I tuck it in really tight underneath jackets, and then, you know, even with a big scarf over top, I find that really stops air from getting out. I really, really like that. So I get a lot of wear out of them. I'm happy to knit a bunch of them. And I ended up knitting, I just wanted something really, really, really simple to show the yarn off because the yarn ended up so fun. I took quite a few pictures of the yarn after I'd wet set it and re-skeined it. And because I wanted to show them to you, but then I realized that I didn't take any before pictures, so there's no reference for how much it plumped up, so that's kind of, you know, not very helpful, Jenny. But it really did plump up so much, and it was so exciting and so much, for me, the star of the show. So I ended up going with the appropriately titled The Simple Thing, which is by Melina Brell, and it is one of these constructions that has become very popular. It's very similar to Petite Knit's Sophie scarf, though the numbers are different, and I believe that the cast on and cast off methods are different, and some things like that. Though this one is very nicely free and knitted at DK weight. I'm not actually sure what Petite Knits is knit at. But anyways, I thought this pattern was just great. It's free, which is always very nice, and simplicity is key. So it's one of these patterns where, and I'm sorry, I realize I never plan this out, and I keep wearing dark colors when I'm trying to show you dark things, and it's just not very helpful, is it? So I'll hold it off beside me maybe so you can actually see what I'm talking about. But it's one of these patterns that's just garter stitch through the middle, kind of a long long line that increases on one side towards the middle, and you weigh your yarn as you go along, reach kind of halfway or just under halfway, and then you start decreasing at the same rate that you did before. It has an I-cord edging, which is very nice. I had never done an I-cord edging before, and I thought that was very, very straightforward, as an I-cord is, but quite a nice touch. And the pattern was quite nice in that it really did give a lot of advice for how to make alterations based on your yarn, how, you know, to really play with increase rates and that kind of thing. Because it's a free pattern, I don't mind sharing too many details because you can download it and look at this very easily yourself. But the pattern that she's written up calls for increasing on one side every 4th row. And I mean, 180 meters of yarn isn't a terribly small amount, but I wanted to make it go as far as I could in terms of length of scarf. So I decided to half my increase rate by doubling the number of rows that I did in between. That's a bit of a math brain twister, but I think that makes sense, right? So I increased every 8th row instead of every 4th row, and that gave me a gentler, slower line of increase. One thing that was a surprise to me with knitting this, well, I guess, because I'm so happy with how this turned out, but, you know, I was hearing all sorts of other podcasters, and I've met a few other spinners, and, you know, everyone was saying to me, you have to knit with your hand spun. Like, you can't be sitting on it, you can't be treating it as too precious, you have to knit with your hand spun, partially because you can't know. You're going to learn so much when you knit with it. You're going to learn so much about what you like, what you don't like, what your yarn is doing, what your plies are doing. Like, you have to knit with it to get to know it. If you're a knitter, right? If you're a weaver, then you should weave with it. If you're a crocheter, you should crochet with it. But I'm a knitter, so they were saying knit with your hand spun. And oh my gosh, were they right. I really did learn so much about the yarn I'd already made, but also probably some of the yarn that I've already finished. And that was really, really interesting. One of the things that was most interesting was this yarn just ended up being much thicker. Like, it's a very different gauge than I expected it to be. And I think that that's partially because my thinking didn't really catch up with the wet setting. Before I wet set this, it was definitely a fingering or, well, probably a sport weight. And afterwards, it was so thick and thin that I picked a needle based on kind of some of the thinner parts of the yarn. And I think maybe I should have gone with the bigger, because it's ended up quite dense, which I like, right? I'm always saying that I really like a dense fabric, and I do really like a dense fabric. And this is garter stitch, so when I block it, I can, you know, garter stitch can stretch to high heaven. So I can play with that a lot, but it's ended up kind of dense in a way that I wish it was a bit longer. I guess that's what I'm saying. I don't mind how dense it is, but I could have gone up a needle size and gotten a longer scarf and the density still would have been fine, is I guess what I'm saying. That said, am I gonna stretch it to high heaven when I block it? Absolutely not, because the squish is so amazing and I don't want it to lose that amazing garter stitch squish. So anyways, I think it did end up being a very solidly DK weight yarn. And it took knitting with it to really understand that. You know, it took really getting part of the way into the knitting project to understand that, I think. But that's fine. That's, you know, that's why I was doing this. That's why I was jumping in and knitting with it. So I haven't said that the simple thing does talk about how you can do this at any gauge. It calls for a DK weight yarn, and I think it's knit on a 4.5 millimeter needle. I'll have to double check myself. I thought that I was doing a kind of sport weight, so I used a 5 millimeter needle because I am a very tight knitter, and I think I probably should have used a 5.5 millimeter needle, to be honest. But, you know, not the end of the world at all, and I am very happy with this. I won't put it on right now just because I realize that I've picked a terrible sweater to wear with this. I'm wearing my Autumn Alpine by Caitlin Hunter. I love this sweater. It's not the easiest sweater to wear with a scarf, and it's warm enough I don't really need a scarf today. So I will post a picture of me wearing this so that you can see it on, and maybe I'll show it again in a future video once I've blocked it if it changes drastically. But really, kind of the most interesting things to say about this were about the learning curve with the hand-spun. The project itself was really simple, really straightforward. I was very conservative with reaching my halfway point for when to start decreasing because I was so afraid of playing yarn chicken, and because the yarn was so thick and thin, I didn't trust my meterage to weight ratio being consistent enough to really go for halfway. So I've ended up with a nice little tiny ball left that can go in some other project. I'm thinking that at some point, because I'm going to end up with lots of little scraps of hand spun like this, so I think that at some point I'll have to do something scrappy to use those up, because that's too precious. I mean, that's too precious to get rid of even if it wasn't hand spun. In hand spun, you know, you definitely have to keep that. So a little bit left, which is no terrible thing, and a really great, super sheepy, squishy scarf. So that's my finished object. Okay, so moving on to works in progress. And I made it sound like I have a ton of works in progress. I have 2 works in progress in addition to the Store Stormer, so 3, and that to me is a lot. But the first work in progress is the Caledonia sweater by Sylvia Watts Cherry that I was talking about recently, and I am knitting this as I had planned in the Estelle Eco Shetland worsted in the color Pine, which is Q42317. I'll put all of this information in the description, of course, but I know that not all websites use the color names. This is a worsted weight yarn, and the Caledonia sweater calls for DK in the pattern, and I did that deliberately because I almost always like to knit things more densely than they are in the samples, but also because a few of the other knitters on Ravelry in their notes wrote that if they knit it again, they would knit it at a slightly tighter gauge. So I thought, oh, okay, if other people are thinking it, then I'm really going to want to do it at a tighter gauge. So this is the yarn that I'm using, and I pulled it out again just because I didn't mention last time that it's a GOTS or GOTS certified yarn, which I think is you know, worth noting. They have quite stiff criteria for what it means to be organic. Organic doesn't always mean, you know, I'm a bit cynical, but I think that the GOTS rating can be quite stringent, so that's quite nice to know, and a bit strange to have ended up with a Canadian wool made of Shetland yarn, but there we go, globalization, it's a very small world, but it is absolutely beautiful and I'm very happy working with it. This is the first true woolen yarn that I've used, and I'm really enjoying it. So let me actually show you what I've done, babbling on about the yarn, and this is the first of several very silly mistakes. Very silly mistakes. So I'll show you first, and then I'll tell you why this is not as ideal as it looks. So this is how far I've gotten. Catch the light, look at the gorgeous, I mean, I'm so happy with the cables. Look at how beautiful those cables are. Really, really lovely. This is just a stitch marker indicating the right side for myself. But I'm so pleased. And I have to rip it all out. Or not all of it, I can go back to the ribbing. But so let me tell you about this before I spoil my silliness. So this was so much fun to knit. I'm really, really enjoying it. I'm finding the charts really easy to follow, really well written, well constructed. Cables can give me hand issues, and I was a bit nervous about this, but I figured that the cables were spread out enough that it would be fun in the way that cables are fun, but not strenuous in the way that really dense cables can you know, get very tiring on your hands. And that was entirely true from my experience, at least. I really enjoyed this cable section. And as you can see, I got right to the end of the cable section. If you're familiar with the sweater. So this cable section, this is the back of the sweater. It's knit in pieces. I should have said that. This is a sweater, in case you didn't tune in with me before, this is a sweater knit in pieces from the bottom up and then sewn together, seamed together at the end. I have never done that before, a fully pieced garment. So that's part of why I chose this pattern, partially because I just love the pattern, but also because I thought it would be really, you know, I don't want to avoid that kind of pattern just because I've never done it before. So this is to get more comfortable with that. This is the back panel. And I did finish the cabling, and then it became really easy. You just do a couple rows of garter stitch, and then you move into the seam stitch pattern. So I stopped paying as close attention. Paid attention through all of the cabling. Beautiful, no errors, very happy with that. I was thinking as I was going along, this is smaller than I expected it to be. You know, based on the maths that I did at my gauge, and I kept kind of checking it on myself and thinking, well, you know, cables, and this is reverse stockinette in between the cables, that stretches out differently when it blocks, and this yarn did change in my swatch when I blocked it, so, you know, maybe it's fine, maybe it's fine. And then I got to the point where I just needed to do some garter stitches. And I had been doing so much purling in here to get the reverse stockinette that I just went on autopilot and I knit one row and then I purled the next row. Oh, you know, not the end of the world, pulled the needle out, that's fine. Ripped that one row out, you know, really not a big deal. But then I went to go grab a smaller needle to pick those stitches up, because it's so much easier to pick up stitches with a smaller needle than the one that you had been using. And I had been keeping both needles for this project in the bowl that I was using. But when I went to go pick up the smaller needle, I picked up the bigger needle. And it was pretty late in the evening. It took me a few minutes to realize I was very confused. And it took me a few minutes. And what it is of course at the end of the ribbing, you change up to your bigger needle. For me, this was, for me to be knitting this sweater at the gauge that I wanted to be knitting, I was using 4.5mm needle and a 5mm needle for the body. And my 5mm needle wasn't attached to my project. And I remember, you know, seeing in the pattern, of course, you switch, as always, as almost always, you switch. When you go from the ribbing, you go up to your bigger needle. And I had pulled the needle out, I was all ready to go. And then I think I was just so excited about the chart that I just kept going with my ribbing needle. I never actually switched. And so I knit this whole thing in a 4.5mm needle. And my partner is very sweet. When I kind of laughed at myself. I was sitting on the couch with him when I realized this. And I kind of laughed at myself and said I had to rip the whole thing out. And he takes ripping out very seriously. He was totally aghast. Oh my gosh, no, there must be, it looks so good, there must be a way you can make that work. And there probably would be. But there are a few reasons. I'm just going to pull it back. The first is, this would work, but it would make a much smaller sweater than I want. You know, I'm early enough, there's no benefit to keeping going and having a smaller than my preferred size sweater. The other thing is that the ribbing is really, really stretchy in comparison to the rest of the sweater because of course it's all knit on the same needle. And I don't love that. The third reason is, as I was nearing the end of this chart, I had enjoyed it so much. Like I actually really, really enjoyed this chart. And I was feeling sad that it was over because I'm going to enjoy the seed stitch, but I don't think I'm going to enjoy the seed stitch as much as I enjoyed this section. And I was feeling really grateful that at least, you know, at the very least, I have the front section, which has the exact same chart. They're worked the same up to the underarm. So I was like, great, I'll get to knit it again. And so I need to reframe my thinking. Great, I get to knit it 3 times, at least 3 times, because I'll rip it out and knit it again. But also, you know, like I'm not saying that I didn't have a minute of, oh, when I realized what I had done, you know, like of course, but fast is not the goal. And, you know, with me and knitting, definitely I'm trying to get as much time out of the money I'm spending on yarn, if, you know, to be really blunt. Yarn is expensive and I'm really enjoying knitting. It's helping me so much in my life right now. You know, it's bringing me so much joy. And so getting more knitting out of one sweater project is not a terrible thing. I did not catch that attitude immediately, but that's definitely how I think in general, and definitely how I'm allowing myself to think about this. Part of me though, you know, I hit a roadblock, and so it was easy to move on to another project, which is what I did, and I will show you that momentarily. But also I just thought it was kind of funny, and I wanted to share, you know, like it's a very silly mistake. But I think that those are kind of common, you know, like lots of us are knitting in the evenings after we've done other things with our days, and it is, you know, like there are variations in how challenging patterns are, and sometimes I misjudge how much brain power I have and what kind of pattern I should be working on. Ironic, because the actual tricky part of this, I was fine, but as soon as I thought I was in safe territory, you know, that's when I made the mistake, which thank goodness I made that mistake, because otherwise maybe I would have knit the whole back before I realized that I wasn't on the right needles. So a happy ending in the end, really. You know, I don't think I'm going to work on this right away. I think I am going to work on the stormer. But when I come back to this, I'll rip it back, and I have this really fun panel to work on again. So that's where I am with the Caledonia. The pattern really is so much fun. So it's a good sweater for this to have happened with. You know, if it was a whole body of stockinette, then I would be in pain. But since it's a really fun section, it's all good. Okay, on to my final whip. Okay, so I'm almost embarrassed about this, but I think that it's useful to, you know, like I think we're all in the same boat. Hopefully we're occasionally in the same boat, or maybe it's just me, and then you can just, you know, have schadenfreude at my errors. You can enjoy me making very silly mistakes. But I am conscious that lots of the knitting I'm showing you today is having to be ripped out. But, you know, it happens. And that is very much the case with my next project, which I'm keeping in a very trendy, this is an old, like I got like a bath set in this for Christmas years ago. It's a name brand. I won't tell you what because it doesn't matter. But it's just one of those, you know, like pharmacy little gifty things that you see at Christmas time. I think my mom got me through that, you know, 10 or 15 years ago. The bath stuff is long gone, but I use this for small projects. It's perfect. So my final project is the Basic Ribbed Socks by Kate Atherley. And I cast these on because, you know, I think I talked in that video where I set out my goals and intentions about how I hadn't thought about sock knitting previously, like that had not been a goal of mine. And then sitting down to think about things that I wasn't intending to do really made me think about socks more seriously. And since then I've been really quite genuinely excited about knitting socks. Like the portability really appeals to me, and the way that, you know, I mean, I haven't knit socks yet, but it seems to me that the heel and the toe are where you have to pay attention, and you obviously need to figure out your fit, and that is an issue for me. I will talk about that. or that has been an issue for me. But otherwise, there's a bit of good, mindless, portable knitting. That seems like a very big win to me. I'm knitting it in another dark color, which I will hold off to the side. But so this is a basic ribbed sock, and I chose this pattern, again, for a number of reasons. This is a free pattern. There are tons of free vanilla sock patterns out there, but I chose this one specifically because I've been reading a lot of Elizabeth Zimmerman's books. Elizabeth Zimmerman, if you're not familiar with her, was a British knitter who moved to the United States in the mid-20th century and really kind of revolutionized the way that we think of home knitting. She was quite a personality. If you aren't familiar with her, I would definitely encourage you to take a look at some of her books. I've been reading them on, unfortunately my library doesn't have any of her books, but I've been reading them on the Internet Archive, which has almost all of them. So I will link to that below. I would definitely encourage you to have a look. She's hilarious, and she's very good if you're prone to overthinking things, as I am. She's very good at being kind of like, you must just do things, you know, which I really appreciate. Anyways, she mentions in quite a few of the books that she's a big believer in a ribbed sock, especially if you're a new sock knitter, or especially if you're knitting, say, gifts for people whose feet you do not have access to make sure the fit is good. Because a rib, of course, will just give you a bit more flexibility in terms of fit. You don't need as perfect a fit as you would in a vanilla stockinette sock. That made sense to me. Sold on the idea of doing a ribbed sock to start. And I bought this absolutely gorgeous, I actually bought 3 colors of this because I was so excited to find it. I think I'm gonna buy another one. But this is Krumke Skoal Wool Edelweiss Classic. I'll show you the ball band. And this is in the color navy, though it does look like it's quite navy in the viewfinder. In real life, I find it almost a deep purple instead of a navy. But part of the reason that the colors are a bit maybe less saturated or a bit less true is that this is a non-superwash wool, and that is why I bought it. I was really interested in the idea that it was non-superwash, and also it does have nylon. I think it's 25% nylon. Let me double check that. Yes, 25% polyester, but the polyester is 100% recycled from bottles. So great, you get the durability of having that polyester in there, the man-made fibers in there, but they haven't been created new for this yarn. They're recycled. So very happy with that. There's the ball band. Yeah, just very pleased. And they suggest a 2 to 3 millimeter needle, and suggest that for 10 centimeters, 4 inches, you should have 30 stitches and 40 rows. So a nice standard sock yarn. And I've got to rip all of this out. But this one is for a different, it's you know, still kind of silly, but in a different way than my Caledonia. And I thought that this was worth sharing just because it is different. They're both, you know, learning curves in different ways. So this one is, you know, gonna have to be ripped back because of sizing. And I'm such a tight knitter, I almost always have to size up in needles. And I decided that for socks, I wasn't gonna swatch. I kind of, you know, I think that if you don't swatch, you can't expect the pattern to turn out exactly the way it does in the sample size, right? Like that's unreasonable to not swatch and then be frustrated that you know, especially frustrated with the designer that it hasn't turned out the way that you expected it to. But if you're willing to reknit things a few times and you realize that you might have to pay more attention and shift as you go along, then, you know, don't swatch. You do you. But for something this small, and I just wanted to get going, I figured I wouldn't swatch. And I would just kind of gauge as I went, and if I had to reknit, I had to reknit. And of course, that has happened. So because I'm such a tight knitter, this pattern calls for 2.5 millimeter needles, and I decided to go up to 2.75. And then this pattern, again, is free, so I don't mind sharing some information about it. you know, it seems like a really good beginner pattern to me, I hope, as a beginner, because it gives a lot of guidance on how to find your measurement and which sock size you should pick based on the measurement of the widest part of the ball of your foot and your ankle. And based on that, I was needing the small size, I think, which, you know, she's suggesting that you go 1 inch smaller than your actual circumference. And I think I was kind of 7.5 inches, so I was looking for 6 or 6.5. I should have double checked these measurements before I shared them with you. But anyways, the measurements don't actually matter. What matters is I decided to go with the measurement that she suggested in the pattern and to go up 1/4 millimeter in needle size, just based on my experience of usually having to go up a needle size to get gauge or close to gauge. I knit 1 inch, maybe 1.5 inches, and it was clear that it was going to be enormous. It was going to be so big on my foot. I pulled it up and like I could fit my whole hand in beside, like it was just too big. And it was so much too big that I thought either going down a needle size or going down to the smaller pattern size. I thought maybe neither one of those would be enough because it was so much too big. So I had cast on 64 stitches with 2.75 millimeter needles initially, ripped that out, way too big, and I cast on again with 2.5 millimeter needles as the pattern called for, and 60 stitches. And that's what this is. And it was looking pretty good. And I tried it on again with 1 inch and then with 2 inches. But, you know, some of this is just an inevitable learning curve of knitting a new type of garment for the first time. I think there's an inevitable, I should have swatched if I wanted to avoid this. That's okay. But I think it's also about learning how socks fit and learning how socks without elastic fit and how I want them to fit. So when I had knit 1 inch or 2, it seemed fine. But of course, the longer you get on your tube, the more of a true fit you're gonna get. And probably around here, I was realizing that it was gonna be too tight for my preference. But at that point, I had already re-knit once that evening, and I didn't wanna re-knit again, so I put it away, and then the next day I just kept going. And that I should not have done. So I can definitely get this on my foot. It fits, it's fine. This wool will probably expand a bit when I block it, right? Non-superwash a bit less than a superwash wool, but still generally, especially, you know, my hands, the way I knit, the way my tension works, superwash for non-superwash wool for me tends to expand slightly widthwise and shrink slightly lengthwise. So that would give me a little bit more wiggle room, but I don't love a tight sock. I like a snug sock, but not a tight sock, and I think this would be tight. So I'm gonna pull back again. I could do a gauge at this point, a gauge swatch, not gonna. I'm gonna pull it back. I'm gonna stick with the 2.5 millimeter needles because I like the fabric that I'm getting this time more than I did when I did the 2 inches with a 2.75 millimeter needle. This is denser, I like it denser. So I'm gonna stick with the 2.5 millimeter needle. And I'm only gonna go up 1 size. I'm gonna cast on just 4 more stitches, which sounds so minor that I keep second guessing myself and thinking, oh no, that's not enough, I should go up 8 stitches. But I don't want it to be a loose sock, I just don't want it to be tight, if that makes sense. So we'll see, maybe I'll end up having to re-knit again, but I think that some of this is just inevitable. You know, it's the learning curve of sock knitting. And I have seen, you know, other podcasters that I really enjoy, that I really respect, take, you know, a couple of pairs of socks to really realize what their preferred needle is and what their preferred stitch count is, you know. Even altering it by just 2 stitches, like, oh, this is fine, but if I was just 2 stitches smaller, I think it would be better. So I think that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna pull back, stick with the same needle, cast on 4 more stitches for 64 stitches total, and see what that gives me. It did occur to me that I could just finish this sock and then do the second sock with 4 more stitches, but I think that would give me sensory dissonance. I can see that kind of thing actually really driving me crazy if one sock is even just slightly tighter than the other. So no, I'll just pull back and restart. And I will, of course, come back and let you know how this goes. But yeah, a pretty good learn, and you know, like, fun, easy TV or chatting or, you know, other kinds of not having to pay too much attention knitting. So that's really fun and not the worst thing to have to reknit. Though I am looking forward to reknitting the Caledonia more than I'm looking forward to reknitting this tube, if I'm honest. So I hope that's not too boring or silly for me to have shared these two things that are like almost non-existent knitting, because I'm gonna undo them. But I'm always really interested to hear people talk about kind of those learning curves and the kind of little roadblocks that we all run into with these kinds of things, and just, you know, like things don't always fit perfectly every time and we have to figure that out. So I think I still need to figure out, you know, like this is making me conscious that knitting a sock that won't be ribbed will be even more of a learning curve, you know, that's making me feel like it's worth putting in some more work to reknit this, to figure out what I like in a ribbed sock, because then maybe that will get me a little bit of a step closer to figuring out what I like in an even more basic vanilla sock, which I think is probably what I have to knit next in terms of getting myself into proper sock knitting and sock knitting comfort. So that's where I'm going with that. And I just have one final little thing to share with you. Okay, so last little item for today. And I made a whole video about this, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. But if you haven't seen this before, this is, I'm not sure what I'm calling it. I was calling it the Invermere sweater when I was first knitting it, when I first kind of came up with the idea for the design and was casting it on, because they're, to my mind, I think they could be any kind of ram sheep, but to me they're bighorn sheep rams. And I am familiar with bighorn sheep because my maternal grandparents lived in a very small town in BC in the mountains called Invermere, and there were bighorn sheep all over. You know, you had to drive through Banff to get to it, and you know, Banff is just full of bighorn sheep, and we'd see bighorn sheep in town and all over the place, and they're just gorgeous. So I was calling it the Invermere sweater, but then both myself and Lewis, my partner, kind of shifted to just calling it the bighorn sweater as I went on, and that's making me think that maybe that's what I just need to call it to myself, you know? So that's a bit of a useless tangent. This is just me thinking it through. But I think, I think this is my bighorn sweater. If you haven't seen this, I shared a video a couple of weeks ago. I'll link to it below. But I wanted to show it to you here, just in a slightly different context than the kind of more process-based video that I shared previously, just because I did use Ladderback jacquard, and that was one of the techniques that I really wanted to explore, and then I laid out my goals and intentions. So I wanted to touch on that here. So I'll show you the scary inside of my sweater. Always a bit nervous, but though I do really love with this sweater has this too. When the print is quite graphic in a colorwork sweater, I like that you can kind of see the reverse of it inside. You can still kind of see the bighorn sheep heads, just in the reverse color, and you can see, I don't know if it's clear, but there are kind of some looped yarn in here where I went in and did duplicate stitches everywhere where I missed a stitch initially. So, you know, it's not a perfect tidy inside, but what can you do? Anyways, but you can probably, if you're familiar with Ladderback jacquard, you can probably tell already just from me having it out here that I didn't do Ladderback jacquard through the whole sweater. I did just regular stranded knitting, catching floats occasionally up above, careful not to catch floats one on top of the other so that they wouldn't show through. And because I was kind of confirming the chart as I was knitting, my plan had been to add in more to the design, because there are these big gaps, right? Like these, you're gonna have to have quite long floats there, and this is lower. That flower is lower than all the others. So that's really long floats. And I was kind of planning as I was going along to change the design to fix that, to make it so that there weren't really long floats. And I kept trying and I kept trying, and I wasn't finding a design that I liked as much as the one I already had for the bottom of the chart. And I'd already talked in the video about how I wanted to try Ladderback jacquard, and I don't know why it didn't occur to me earlier. But I kind of thought, well, you know, maybe I should just try it here. I think it seemed like a lot because there was no designer to be like, this would be a good pattern to try Ladderback jacquard with, but I don't know why I felt like I needed that, because once I, you know, looked up some videos and decided that I was going to do it, it worked great. It was perfect. It was exactly what I needed. It made it so easy to keep the design exactly the way it was. It wasn't stressful. I'm so pleased. So, if you're not familiar with Ladderback jacquard, it is this section kind of lower down where you can see almost these kind of knit stitches. Well, I mean, they really are kind of knit stitches in between that are laying along the fabric. So let me stand up so you can really see that. These knit stitches here, right here. So what that is Ladderback jacquard is basically creating a kind of superstructure or interior structure of purl stitches, so that you're purling every couple stitches. You decide how often you want to make them, you decide how long you want your floats to be, and you're working those stitches on the same needle, but you're always purling them. And because you're working in two different yarns, because you're working with your, you know, your float color in whatever section that is, they aren't actually touching except for at the start where you first cast them on, and then at the end you cast them off by just knitting them together with one of your main stitches. So for me, I cast them off by knitting one of my light colored stitches with a dark colored stitch, and then it just sits behind and is this kind of lovely net behind, and it makes tension much easier. It means that your floats are not crazy long, right? Like where a float maybe would have had to be this long, which is too long for me for a float. You know, my tension is not good enough to manage that. Putting in all of these, sorry, I've left a tail. This is sewn in, but I've just left the tail long to felt in. But you know, I've divided that up with several stitches in between, and it worked really well. I was maybe a bit too loose with my Ladderback jacquard, so when it came time to close them off and knit them together, when I first did that, they were actually showing, the duplicate stitch was showing, and every single video that I watched said that they shouldn't show. So I knew that something was wrong, and what I ended up doing was I just pulled that single round out, and I knit, I think, just one or two more rounds before I then did the duplicate stitch. So I just stretched some of the Ladderback jacquard loops a little bit longer, one or two rows down before I knit them in, and it, you know, it solved it. I had just been a little bit too loose, but I thought that it was helpful to share, you know, even if your tension isn't perfect, even if it's a bit too loose, pas de fin du monde, you know, you just go a row or two more and then knit it in, and that fixed it for me. Then they were really not visible, and they're not tugging. They weren't tugging when I blocked. So that worked really, really well. And I'm really glad that I did it, even though it was a bit scary to do it the first time when I had so many other variables going on that I was trying to control. But that will definitely, for long floats, that will be a go-to technique for me now, I think. It was also less complicated than I thought it was. So, and there are so many good videos out there. The first couple of videos really didn't click with me. The first that I encountered didn't click with me, but I'm a really big believer in, you know, there's so many wonderful people who donate so much time explaining these techniques. I think there's a lot of generosity on the internet. A lot of other stuff too, but a lot of generosity on the internet. And I'm a really big believer on, you know, not stopping with the first, second, or third video and really banging your head against a wall to figure it out. Keep looking, I think, because almost always you're able to find someone who clicks with your way of thinking and your way of learning, and then it's just a bit easier. And that's definitely what happened to me. I think it was like the 5th video that I found where I was like, oh, clicks. So that was really good. So that is everything that I wanted to share with you today. I think I've said everything. As I said, I have been doing a bit of spinning and I haven't shared any of that. I've just been kind of working on these smaller projects alongside. I do have plans for lots of the spinning. Maybe I'll just have an episode at some point where I show some of the spinning all together, if I don't have specific plans for some of it, just so that you can see what's going on. but maybe if I'm doing it in a cluster, it'll feel a little bit, I'll feel like I have a bit more to say about it than just a single skein here or there. But I hope that you are having a good spring if you're in the northern hemisphere, or autumn if you're in the southern hemisphere, of making, and that you're, you know, knitting at the speed that you're enjoying, and you know, I'm hoping that you're making fewer silly mistakes than I am, and having to do less reknitting than is in my future. But if you do, I hope that you know, I hope that you can enjoy it. In that previous video where I talked about the bighorn sweater, someone commented that they had been ripping something out as they watched me rip out, you know, yet another section of that sweater, and that it made them feel like they weren't alone. And then reading that comment made me feel like I wasn't alone, and I was thinking about that comment a lot as I was deciding to reknit these things. So, you know, if you're having to frog and reknit, hopefully we're all, you know, we can all be in the same boat together, and that will help a little bit. So thank you so much. I hope that you're having a great week, and I'll talk to you soon.